Hello and welcome to the Infinity Bros podcast, the only podcast that's perfectly balanced as all things should be. My name is Isaac Edlin, I'm your host today, and with me I have just one Infinity Bro, Jarrett.
Hey, that's me. Hi, guys.
And we are doing our second official bonus Minisode episode. Are you excited about this, Jarrett?
I'm excited and also proud that you chose me, the best Infinity Bro, to be on this episode.
Absolutely. I don't even, you know what? I'm trying to think. I don't know. Maybe Robbie would contest that he'd be up there, but I don't think anybody else would really argue that. Probably.
I feel like they're the best Infinity Bro.
Well, for what we're talking about tonight.
Sure.
Anyways. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe we should take a poll. Should we do like a Twitter
See
poll?
What the best Infinity Bro is.
Oh, no. Who people think is the best Infinity Bro.
That will not end well at all.
Yeah, feelings. Zane will get his feelings hurt probably. So
I would probably just vote for Zane like 20 times.
Here's the thing. Everybody feels like Zane is going to get their feelings hurt, so everybody
votes for Zane.
So Zane actually wins like unanimously. He's the best Infinity Bro.
Man, we're off to a great start with this one.
Yeah, so welcome again. Tonight we are doing another bonus minisode, which are our minisodes. We try to keep the 20 to 30 minutes, just a little bit quicker, so you guys can listen to them on the go, on your commutes, or whatever you like to do. We'd like to just thank you for wherever you're listening, however you're listening. We appreciate any and all people tuning into the podcast. Tonight, we are talking about comic books. So I feel like this gets overshadowed maybe a little bit just with all the pop culture stuff that we end up talking about. And really at the root of this podcast, it's pretty much a comic book podcast because everything that we talk about is generally related to comic books in some way. So we kind of wanted to get back to our roots a little bit. So the first thing that we're going to do is a little segment that we like to call Get to Know an Infinity Bro. So I'm going to propose this question, and I'll have Jarrett, I'll have you answer it first for me.
Sure, gotcha.
So, what is your favorite comic book character and why?
I think most people who have been around the show long enough probably expect me to say Moon Knight, and I think a couple of years ago that was probably true, but as I've grown up a little bit and gotten to dig into a little bit more comic books than I originally started with, I think that maybe I chose Moon Knight as a kid to be edgy a little bit, you know what I mean? To try to seem a little bit cooler.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But
Moon Knight's so edgy.
He's very edgy. Lives in the shadow.
He's like the Mark of comic book characters. He's just the edgelord for sure.
Mm-hmm. A little off his rocker, and yeah, totally.
Yeah. Actually, that now that you say that, I'm actually like all in on this comparison. Mark is Moon Knight.
Yeah, sold. But no, realistically, I think going through the comics, I kind of feel more like Hawkeye is my guy. Clint Barton is just like a very relatable character, and it's maybe because of the Matt Fraction run that really sold it to me, but even him as Ronin is just a very great character. So I think looking at that and then the way that he's portrayed as just this regular dude who happens to run with the Avengers and stuff, and his very broken past makes him a very relatable and likable character. So yeah, I think as time has gone on, it's become Clint more and more.
Yeah, I didn't read that Matt Fraction run until you recommended it to me. It was probably last summer at some point, and that thing was so good. I powered through it in one night, like the whole run. It was amazing. So yeah, that I totally get where you're coming from with that. That's pretty cool. So Moon Knight was your favorite growing up, you think?
Absolutely. I'm trying to remember where we lived at the time, but I remember when we were younger, my mom used to love going to like antique stores. She still does all the time. And like we'd go to garage sales and stuff. And my favorite thing as a kid was to try to find collectibles because my dad collects Hot Wheels and a number of things. So it started out with like cards, and then obviously I found comics and stuff that I liked. And I think the first one I bought for myself with some money that I had from either chores or like mowing the lawn or shoveling sidewalks or whatever was a Moon Knight comic. And it was such a bizarre, off the wall I think it's issue 36 or 34 of his original run, and he gets his legs broken by a villain called the Fly, and the Fantastic Four are involved, and it was just such a weird and bizarre comic that I instantly fell in love. I was like, this is the strangest superhero to me. Like, he gets beaten by a guy called the
Yeah.
Fly, and as I read his
Yeah.
comics, it was like more and more just a lovable character, and I like that idea of like he doesn't really know if he's coming or going. He's got these three different personalities that he cycles through. And the first run that I collected was with his, it's like 2 or 3 issue series. And it's right at the beginning of the Moon Knight original run where he's trying to find out who this bad guy is who's like kidnapping people and slashing them up. And it ends up, spoiler alert for a very, very, very old comic, but it ends up being his brother. And the way that they reconcile that is just really cool, and the way the story plays out. So, yeah, I really fell in love with him at a young age. And then obviously, like in the 90s and then the early 2000s, like everybody wanted to get super super dark with comics. And so when you're a kid, that's like, oh yeah, it's so cool and edgy. And even like the whole,
I
like,
want to
everybody
see
knows,
Edgy Jarrett. That's what I want to see.
oh my
I would
gosh,
love to see some pictures.
he's a
We
brat.
already seen the emo edgy Robert
Yeah.
from high school, so now I want the Jarrett edgy.
Dude, I was just a brat. I think I still am kind of a brat, but I was just like this snotty, like,
Just deep down, it just pops out every once in a while.
yeah, there it is. um, no, but like, so everybody knows like of the Batman run where Joker gets his face cut off and then wears it as a mask. But what a lot of people don't know is like Moon Knight did that first with his villain Bushman. He catches him on the pier after like this whole scene, and he cuts his face off, and then Bushman comes back later with his face as a mask. And like, dude, it was some wild stuff that went on in those
It's
comics.
intense for sure. Yeah,
Um,
that's intense.
and so yeah, that kind of drew me as a kid. I was like, yeah, this is so cool. I'm so tough reading these comic books, but
Ugh.
I grew out of it. Thank goodness.
Yeah, that's good. You're not quite as edgy anymore, huh?
And I think Moon Knight as a character too, like he's had so many different runs, and everybody's taken a shot at him, and I think each person who writes him differently brings a very different character to light. In fact, like the Moon Knight that we have now was almost completely unrecognizable from like the very edgy like early 2000s Moon Knight. And he's a much more likable character now than he was then.
Right. Yeah. I don't read a lot of current comics, but some of the newer ones that I have read, he definitely seems more like distinguished, and like more people are actually like looking up to him. And
Yeah,
I
he's
was
not
like,
like a
oh,
psychopath.
wow. Yeah, he's not like this crazy dude who everybody just looks at with weird eyes, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty good. Nice, dude. So for me, it's not really any surprise that I'm going to say Spider-Man, obviously. I've been a Spider-Man fan from the very, very beginning. And I really didn't read that many comics growing up. Like, my access was pretty limited. Like, I didn't buy comics. The only comics I really read were stuff that I could find at the library. So I didn't read a ton of comics growing up, but Spider-Man was always my favorite. Just with his personal story of perseverance, I guess. Like, he's just a normal guy, and he just makes it through life, you know. And I feel like that makes him one of the more relatable superheroes or comic book characters in general, I guess. So, you know, just like the fact that I can see myself in his shoes, even though I don't have super cool spider powers.
Yeah.
That was what really drew me to him growing up, and even now too, because you see him in some of the comics where he's in his 30s, and I look at him and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I totally relate to so many of his thoughts and stuff that are going through his head. And just the fact that he's just like a funny, quippy character too. Like, he's just super, super enjoyable to read, and he has some pretty serious comic book runs, but most of the time he's just like enjoyable to read. So
Yeah.
so he's definitely my favorite. I guess one of my other favorites is probably Captain America, honestly. And he's like pretty, he's like pretty predictable and one dimensional, but like just his character is really what drew me to his comic book character. Just the fact that he is willing to do what's right no matter what. Like, in some of I don't remember exactly what run it starts in, but he finds out that the American government's basically just, oh, it's probably a civil war, isn't it? Maybe it's earlier than that, but he finds out that the American government's just doing all this junk, and he doesn't really want to be a part of it, and decides that he's gonna go rogue and not be. I mean, he's still Captain America, but
Isn't that
he's
like,
not Captain
yeah,
America,
like every time he turns into like Nomad or U.S. Agent, or obviously
Right,
in
yeah,
Civil
yeah,
War, like that's kind
exactly.
of a theme that rolls around.
Yeah, exactly. So just like he's willing to do what's right, even though everybody else that is above him or beside him is telling him this is what he has to do. So that's one quality of Captain America that I've always really enjoyed. And yeah, so those are some of my favorite comic book characters. But again, like I feel like I didn't really do any deep diving into characters besides Spider-Man until I was probably in college. Like I just didn't read that many comics. So I did read quite a bit of Batman as well, and he's up there definitely on my list too. But that's just because Batman's so BA. You can't really not like him as a
Yeah, that's fair.
character.
Yeah.
But he's like everybody's favorite pick, so I can't pick that one. So
I don't know. Like I would say
yes.
Batman isn't, and this is gonna get super controversial. And I think next time Robbie sees me, he's probably gonna put me in a headlock or something. But um, I mean, like I wouldn't even say Batman is my favorite of the Justice League. Like I know he's a
Really?
very
Okay.
people love him as a character, but I don't know. It's just such a I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to be like a comic book hipster, but I think there's like more interesting characters than him. Um,
Yeah.
I think
You're
Batman.
not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Batman is very much like how Moon Knight is, right? Where he's written by so many different great writers, and they all kind of have a slightly different approach. That like, yeah, there is a version of Batman that's like one of my top five of all time, but there's also like really, really poorly written Batman.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that's actually a really good point because, like, he as a character himself, he's really not that interesting, but he's just got some really good writing
Hmm.
during parts in his whole history. So, like, I mean, if a comic is well written, it doesn't matter who the characters are. Like, you can still enjoy that comic, regardless of who is in it if it's well written. So
Yeah, for sure.
so I think that's one thing about Batman. As you say that, I was thinking of other Justice League characters that I really enjoy. And I've always been drawn to Flash too. Like he's kind of similar to Spider-Man in the he's got a little bit of the
Right.
quippiness going on, but he's a little bit more serious at times, but the speed thing has always been something that I thought was really cool. So even though, oh, you know what? Okay, total side note here. I started playing DC Universe Online again with a couple of
Wow.
guys from I know, right? Blast of the
For
Past.
real.
That game is just so old. But a couple of the Good Morning guys like invited me to play, and I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't dove into that for so long. So I downloaded it, and the first character that popped up that I apparently had made was a speedster with a bow and arrow.
That's pretty cool, actually. Except he's faster
Okay,
than the arrows, but
yeah, he's faster than the arrow. That's the first thing I thought when it came up. I was like, okay, so this guy's gonna shoot an arrow, and then he could literally beat the arrow to
just
whatever
outrun
he
it.
shot it at. Like that's just totally
That's
useless.
so good.
I don't know maybe maybe I made him as a parody. I have no idea, but that was the first character that I saw, and I was like, what was I thinking when I made this guy? Ugh, just
I
ridiculous.
think
But
my
yeah,
first
Flash.
DC Online or DC Universe Online character was just like me trying so hard to make Moon Knight in DCU.
That would not surprise me at all.
It was just white Batman. Like
Yeah, basically. Gosh, that game was really cool just for the character creation concept, but it was like so grindy. It
it
was
was an awful
ridiculous.
MMO.
Like the
Yeah,
game
absolutely.
was exactly the same the whole way through.
It
It's
really
just
is.
it was ridiculous. But it is when you get a bunch of guys in playing it, it is pretty fun.
Yeah,
So
for sure. The social
so
aspect.
yeah. Anyways, so that's kind of just wrap up on our favorite character. Any other honorable mentions or anything you want to mention, Jarrett, before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, like, okay, so if I wanted to do my Marvel list, like, we would be here for the whole night. But I think I gotta give some love to DC because I don't do it often enough. And I think for as much as we rag on the DC cinematic universe, like, obviously their comic books are top tier. Like DC comics are great.
And yeah, I mean, both of them are awesome. But you know where I feel like, sorry, I'm
No,
interrupting you,
you're
but
fine. Go ahead.
I feel like DC does really great when it comes to their villains. Like they have some top tier
For
villains in
sure.
the DC universe for sure. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no. So I'm a huge fan of Doctor Fate, which I'm sure Max would be psyched for. Is it Max who likes Doctor Fate as well?
Yeah, it's I think it's Max because he loves Doctor Strange, and I vaguely remember him talking about Doctor Fate and the comparisons to Doctor Strange and stuff like that. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I always thought the golden helmet was just such a cool thing to like.
yeah,
You put on the
that's
helmet and you're
sweet.
instantly like this agent of order. But my all time favorite DC character is Aquaman. Um, and
Oh,
I gotta say, like, I didn't read a lot of Aquaman comics growing up, but uh, just before, or maybe, yeah, I think it was just before we got married. Christian bought me the new 52 Aquaman, the first volume, and I read that and I was like, wow, this is really stinking good. And I was like of all people, it's Aquaman. And I didn't expect to like it.
yeah,
And the
right.
more I read that one, man, I fell in love. It was really good. And so I dug into
Really?
some more of the older stuff. And yeah, so I think he's probably my top DC hero.
Wow. Okay. I have not. I don't
It's
think
not
I've
off the
read
wall. It's
any
very good.
Aquaman besides like like events that he's like been a part of or anything like that. But I don't. I don't. I've read a ton of Batman, but other DC characters I really haven't read a lot into. So I think I have a couple. I've done a little bit of Flash too, just because I liked him before. But yeah, I definitely need to do more diving into DC for sure because I know like all of the events that I've read that they have are just fantastic. Like Blackest Night is one of my favorite storylines like of all time, and Flashpoint. Oh my gosh,
Flashpoint is
so
very
many
good.
good ones. Well, speaking of that, I guess that's a pretty good transition into what we're talking about
Yeah,
next,
man.
which is our favorite comic book runs. So Jared, I would assume that you're probably our comic book expert on the Infinity Bros. You probably read more comics than anybody else, I would assume. I know. Robbie is pretty deep into comics too, so he's definitely on the DC side. He might be the foremost comic
Yeah,
book
he probably absolutely has me
expert.
beat there.
Right, yeah. But I think just in general, I would say that you're probably up there in the Infinity Bros. So I'm going to default to you, first of all. What is your favorite comic book run, and why is that?
So we've talked about it on the podcast before, so I won't go into too much on this. But Matt Fraction's Hawkeye is like what I always point to for people who are interested in comic books but don't want to get into a crazy event. Because it's like what if every single one of us who's trying so hard to be like a responsible and put together adult with all our flaws and failures was also a superhero trying to like hold their lives together. And it's such a great like it's this whole piece about his humanity and also him as a superhero and how he's trying to balance those two. But Fraction focuses more so on his like human side than him trying to be a superhero. And I think it's such a like we have this idea of superheroes being like Superman, right? And like the issues that they deal with are such a grand scale. But like, what happens
Right.
if somebody is just like trying to take care of their apartment or they have a stray dog that they're trying to keep alive or like all these things? And it's for me, it's such a
Yeah.
human picture of a superhero that like I instantly fell in love. And like, it's fantastic writing. It's very witty. David Aja does the art for it, and it is so stinking good. So yeah, that's my all time favorite run, and then a close second would probably be, it's got to be Moon Knight for sure, and I think the Ellis run is probably my favorite, which is not the newest one. Jeff Lemire is currently holding down that job as far as I can tell. And then, but the volume right before that was Warren Ellis, and it is so stinking good. It's a almost a reboot of his whole persona and personality. And yeah, if you've never had the chance before to check out a Moon Knight comic, I think that's a better place to start than to start from the beginning would be with Ellis's run.
Okay. Well, based on your recommendation of Matt Fraction's Hawkeye to me, I definitely think I might have to check it out at some point. Also, I remember getting a Moon Knight like sticker. You know those like 50-cent sticker machines that are
Yeah,
in the
man.
front of like every store? I remember getting a Moon Knight sticker one time, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this guy looks so cool! I gotta figure out like who it is and figure out everything about him." So I like went and looked him up, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Moon Knight! He's so cool!" Even though I knew like absolutely nothing
So
about him,
edgy.
but he just looks so cool, you know? Yeah. So that was my earliest memory of Moon Knight. But yeah, I'll have to check that out, man. So for me, it is definitely Civil War. One of the first like events that I ever read, and I'm trying to think of when I first read it. It had to be in high school because it came out in 2006, so it was like pretty new at the time, and that was probably one of the only current comics that I had ever read, honestly. And man, that from start to finish, that is definitely my favorite comic book run. Like it's just so cool to. I mean, that's like what you wonder when you're talking about superheroes is which superhero can beat this other superhero,
Yeah,
because
man.
you never see that in comics, like you see them facing off of villains and you see them team up against villains. You don't ever see them fight. So that just the concept of the Civil War, and then it's just super super well written.
Absolutely.
And the iterations that have come after it, like Ultimate Alliance 2, the video game, and the Civil War movie, both did a really good job of kind of transcribing their version of Civil War
Sure. It's like
into
paying
everything.
homage to the original.
Right, yeah, and they did a really good job of kind of keeping the story intact, even though they were like totally different
Yeah.
iterations of the story. Although I will say, Ultimate Alliance 2 is pretty spot on. Like they do pretty much the same exact story, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that's definitely always been my favorite, and actually my second favorite is one that I mentioned before as well, which is Flashpoint.
Yeah. Flashpoint
Flashpoint
Paradox is
is
great.
yeah, fantastic. Again, it kind of plays on both of my favorite DC characters, which is Batman and the Flash, and really like one of the most touching comic book panels I have ever seen is at the end of Flashpoint when
Oh, when he gives him the letter?
yeah, when Flash brings back Bruce the letter from his dad Thomas Wayne, who is Batman in the Flashpoint paradox, and Bruce reads the letter from his dad, who obviously in his universe is dead. Like that's just one of the coolest, like most touching moments in comic book history for me. Although I will say my comic book history is probably quite small. So, but anyways, yeah, so that I love that story, and I did mention before I love Blackest Night. That's a really cool one, but I get a little bit lost in some of those big DC events because there's so many characters who I have no
Yeah.
idea
And
who
there's
the
a
heck they
lot
are,
going on. Yeah.
and there's so many. Like I've tried to read some of the Crisis events, and
Oh, yeah.
I just get
That's
bogged
rough.
down because there's so many characters that I have no idea what's going on. But they are still like the artwork always is fantastic, and it's fun to see your favorite characters been like get some action and stuff like that. So, and then I guess also I'd like to mention I always go back to the first like probably 50 episodes of The Amazing Spider-Man, just the original run.
Yeah.
And like it's always kind of, you always chuckle when you go back because they're written in the 60s. Peter Parker's this nerdy kid with like these big circle
Yeah,
glasses,
man.
like
They
it's
really hammed it
totally
up.
totally dated. And the artwork in the first, like even up to like episode 4 or 5 it's not that good. It's not good, but the storyline is just great. And I love seeing, and he's got one of my favorite rogues galleries too. Like
Yeah,
he just
absolutely. Very iconic.
episode the first like 20 episodes, the first 20 comic books of the Amazing Spider-Man run, it's just like iconic villain after iconic villain, like one comic book after the other. They just keep showing up. So that's I love going back to those and rereading those. I try to do it every year, but it doesn't always happen. But I definitely should be reading new comics because there's so many comics out there that I haven't read.
Yeah, man, it's a lot, and like, it's interesting too because you talk about the rogues galleries, and I think obviously we know Batman's, and I think there's so many good ones that belong to the Spider-Man franchise that like you can play off of
Right.
very well, and obviously like we saw them in the cartoons and stuff, but to see some of that on the silver screen, or not the silver screen, yeah, the silver screen would be great. Like I want to see, give me the world where like Kraven the Hunter shows up in like the Marvel
Oh,
Cinematic Universe, and like
please.
even people forget that Kingpin, I mean, obviously they had him in
Oh yeah,
Spider Verse, but like people see
yeah.
him
If
as
you're
a
not well
Daredevil villain,
versed
and he's
in
not. He
right,
was a
exactly.
Spider-Man villain first.
Yeah, if you're not well versed in Spider-Man and his villains and stuff, you could very well forget that he's a Spider-Man villain because he's so prominent in all the Daredevil stories too.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's really cool. Though. I love his rogues gallery. There's so many good characters. Just to play off of that,
Yeah.
whose rogue gallery do you think is the best, Jared? Whose do you like the best?
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot here, because like,
So that we didn't talk about this, but it came
yeah,
up.
no,
So
it's so easy to say like Spider-Man and Batman, and for as much as I want to say like that's not the case, I do really think it's got to be Spider-Man. Like, so
yeah.
kind of behind the scenes here a little bit. I You're gonna hate me so much for this. I don't like Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Like
Ooh.
I get the whole
Oh.
bit, but like I think he's such a golden boy that I want to read a I don't know, maybe an edgier character, even though that's so dumb. But like I love Scarlet Spider, as in like Kane Scarlet Spider,
Oh,
not
yeah.
Ben.
Okay. I mean, I can't fault you for liking those over Peter Parker, but I always have to go back to Peter Parker.
Yeah, man.
I guess, yeah. I mean, he's definitely not edgy. So if that's what you're looking for, you're probably looking in the wrong
Yeah, it's
place.
not. He's not. But he's such a golden boy. But no, like you see like Craven's Last Hunt, and like Jackal with all the cloning stuff. Obviously, you have
Yeah. Yep.
Vulture and Doc Ock and the whole Superior Spider-Man run. Like, man, can you imagine like if they tried to do that with almost any other character, like other than Spider-Man and Doc Ock?
Right.
I don't think that
Yeah.
that comic would have
Exactly.
gotten the kind of legs that it has
Right.
had.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And man, the crazy part is, I mean, with let's see how many. There's been 9 Spider-Man movies. Is that including? Let's see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven,
Oh, you're
eight,
counting them
eight
for us.
counting,
Yeah, yeah.
8 counting Into the Spider Verse, and they've really only like probably scratched the surface of the Spider-Man. I mean, okay, that's maybe being a little dramatic. They've haven't dug deep into the barrel. That's what I'll say. Like they still have villains that have not even touched the the big screen yet. So I'm really excited to
And
see how deep they can go.
yeah, and like a lot of the villains that they have done have like not been done justice, right? Like
Right? Yeah.
there have been, so obviously we saw William Dafoe as Green Goblin, and that was fantastic, right? But like
Yeah. Yeah, he did a good job.
seeing a good Harry Osborn Goblin would be great.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much room to play there with like all these different characters that you can develop and all these different villains. Like again, give me the movie with Craven, give me the movie with Jackal.
Oh
Like
yeah.
obviously they
Yeah.
just did Mysterio, and I was wondering how that was going to come across, and I think they did such a
Right.
fantastic job
And
with him.
yeah, that was amazing. Like Disney, for whatever you want to say about their mishandling of the Spider-Man franchise, like they've come out like putting Vulture in Homecoming and then Mysterio in Far From Home, like villains that we haven't seen before, and both of them were just fantastic,
Done
like
very, very
versions of the
well. Yeah.
character. Yeah, so totally. I mean, I'm loving everything, and I personally just for nostalgia's sake, always say that Tobey Maguire is my favorite Spider-Man. Tom Holland is fantastic,
Yeah.
though. I love him, and everything that they're putting out with him as Spider-Man, I'm gobbling up as it comes out. Like,
Yeah, man.
it's all fantastic. So, well, Jarrett, anything else you want to add about comic book runs or comic book characters? Because I guess we did get a little bit off topic at the last part.
Yeah,
there.
no, you're fine. Man, as far as runs go, like I I'm not a big fan of telling somebody to go read events. Even though like obviously both Marvel and DC and some of the more indie comics have great events. I like people to start out with a run that they can follow and build a character with. But when it does come to events like we've been talking about, like Civil War has so many good beats. Like people think of these comic runs as like just superhero beat 'em ups, and I think a lot of them are. But like if you look at Civil War has the whole scene with when Spider-Man defects to the other side, right? Like that whole scene is great,
Yep.
especially with
There's a great political commentary in the background of Civil War, and I guess it's not
so
even in
good.
the background;
Yeah,
it's
it's
the
right in the
foreground
forefront.
because that's what it's all about. So,
But like like that scene where Spider-Man switches sides and then Punisher is carrying him into the secret headquarters, and
yep.
Captain America just goes ape and like tears and Punisher just doesn't fight back. Like that whole
Yep,
scene
he's
is
just-
such a good beat.
so good.
There's a point, and somebody pointed out to this to me. I didn't catch it until after the fact, but I always thought it was Daredevil who said this, but I believe it's Iron Fist. So Iron Fist is posing as
I know
Daredevil,
what you're talking
and he's being escorted into the prison. And while he's being escorted into the super prison, they say Tony asks like, "Has he said anything since he arrived?" And the guards say no, but he had this under its tongue, and they pull it out, and it's this silver piece, and he says, like this panel gave me such chills. He looks at
I know. I guess you're talking about it. I'm getting the chills
so
right now
good.
because I'm seeing it in my mind.
he looks at Tony and he says, "I guess that makes what does he say? I guess that makes 41 Judas." And then like
31 pieces of silver.
oh, it's such a good like mic drop
So
moment.
good. See, okay, and I think we discussed this in the group chat before, but like it almost deflates it a little bit that it's
I know,
Iron Fist
'cause,
because
like-
it's totally such a Daredevil thing to say.
It is a very Daredevil move for sure.
I know, and we were so pumped about it, and then I remember having that conversation, and Zane was like, "Actually, I'm pretty sure. Actually,
Actually, and I'm like, don't ruin this for me, Zane.
actually,
Knock
I'm
it
pretty
off.
sure that's Iron Fist."
Jared, do you
That's-
even read
That's
comics?
total Zane move to pull.
Yeah,
Come
man.
on, Zane. Yeah, but that panel gives me chills, man.
If you're listening
Man,
to this
there's-
as an Infinity Bro fan, right, and you're like, yeah, these guys normally review TV shows and movies, and like you haven't read a comic, obviously, again, like I'm gonna point you towards finding a character that you like and reading some of their runs. But if you're looking for a good first event, Civil War is where it's at, 100%.
Oh yeah, totally. And I would say probably tread carefully as far as what you know, because if you're not a Marvel person, it's probably not, any, like you said, any events are kind of sketchy, because if you read an event of a publisher that you're not familiar with, there's just going to be a lot of stuff that you probably don't understand.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you're semi-familiar with Marvel characters, even if you've just watched the MCU, you'll recognize like a majority of the main characters in that run. So it is a pretty good starting off one for Marvel for sure.
I wonder, like, because I'm pretty steeped in this stuff, and I remember like trying to read some of the DC events, and it just all going over my head. And I got to think like with House of M and stuff like that, right? Like if you don't have the build up to understand why
true.
Wanda is in
Yeah.
the shape that she's in at the beginning of House of M, like
That's true.
you would totally be lost through that whole series, I feel like. So yeah,
That's
that's
true.
again why I like point to, and it's so hard, right? Because as fans of this, we want people to get in and engage with this sort of product, right? But if I'm the casual observer, I'd rather read a Civil War than read like, you know what I mean, Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. Even though, again, I'm telling you, Matt Fraction's Hawkeye is the better product.
Yeah.
But with these events, you almost have to have so much context for them that you're not saying, "Hey, go buy like Secret Wars or Battle World," right? Like that whole thing makes absolutely zero sense unless you've read the end.
Yeah.
And like the end of Marvel doesn't make sense unless you've read both the Ultimates and the Avengers leading up to that. And there's like so much that builds, and it's just this huge snowball of like, yeah, just go back and read every Marvel comic since the beginning of time.
Yeah, for real. Oh, yep. Well, we could honestly probably talk another half hour about all of this, just because I feel like this is stuff we haven't really talked about much on the podcast since we started. And we're just like nerds, and we just like this kind of
man,
stuff.
you like uncorked a barrel here that I don't think people were prepared for.
Gosh, we might have to make another segment, huh? Ugh.
I think that would be great.
We do have a couple free Infinity Stones, I think, so we might have to dig deep and see what we can come up with here.
Yeah, my wife brought up a really good point. She's like, because we listened to the last week's episode on the car ride today, and she's like, Max is really talking about how much this is a comic book podcast. And then she said something to the effect of like, you guys should really have a segment where you talk about these different comic runs that you like and explain why you like them and maybe some historical background. So I don't know, man, there might be something to that.
I think that's a great idea, and if it means that it's forcing me to read more comics, then I guess so be it. You know, I guess so be it. All right, Jarrett. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a blast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Infinity Bros Universe, for tuning in to this bonus minisode. You can find us at our brand new website, theinfinitybros.com. Both Jared and I have an article up on our blog, The Daily Snap, now, and we're looking forward to coming up with some more awesome content. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We have a TikTok.
Oh, man.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. What kind of world are we living in where we have a TikTok? It's nuts. But anyways, we thank you so much for being a part of the Infinity Bros universe. We hope to interact with you via our Discord or our social media platforms. Definitely check us out on any of those and interact with us. Shoot us an email, infinitybrospodcast@gmail.com. Gosh, I have like 2 minutes of outro here that I'm just rolling here.
Yeah, dude, sounds great.
There's so much stuff that we have that you can check out. And we're actually going to live stream on our Twitch channel not too long after this. So check out that and our YouTube channel. Once again, Jarrett, thank you for coming on. And thank you, Infinity Bros, for joining. We will talk to you later. Bye.
All right. We love you, 3000. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Infinity Bros podcast. You can find the Infinity Bros on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Infinity Bros. Feel free to send listener feedback via email at infinitybrospodcast@gmail.com.